Started.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Sadkunam. I am the owner of Northstar Technology Group, and we are one of the nation's leading managed service providers. Our goal is to help businesses, small and medium, create faster business success through better use of technology. We do that by building fast, available, and secure technology solutions. We needed to find a business partner to help us on our business continuity for our customers that help meet those same objectives, and we selected Datto. Today, Michael DePalma, the Senior Channel Development Manager from Datto, is fortunate to join us today. Mike graduated from Johns Hopkins University in 2002 with a degree in political science. After graduation, he began a career in sales, which has covered a wide range of industries from banking to construction management, and eventually led him to technology. After a decade of sales, Mike shifted to presenting to large audiences in a more educational capacity, helping small businesses understand the current environments, including cyber threats that jeopardize each individual industry. In his role as Channel Development Manager at Datto, Mike represents himself and the company at numerous trade shows, technology conferences throughout North America, frequently presenting alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and even the FBI. The objective of these presentations is to connect with and educate business owners and IT professionals on current cyber threats and the role of business continuity in combating them. Today, I welcome Michael DePalma. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much, Ken. So as Ken mentioned, my name is Mike DePalma, Senior Channel Development Manager at Datto, and my job does normally take me around the world doing presentations, sitting on seminars. I've been now grounded for day 88 as I have a countdown in my office because I don't think I've been home this long in 5 years. But a lot of the stories that I'm going to talk about and a lot of the strategies that we're going to talk about up front are stories that I heard directly from folks from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, a lot of times state agencies, and things like that. So, you know, the threats are growing, and there's luckily folks out there like Ken that have, systems in place to try to protect their clients and keep them up and running. Very briefly about Datto, so we are a business continuity provider. We're based out of Norwalk, Connecticut, so we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. For the entrepreneurs on the call, it actually is a really cool story. Our founder started the company when he was 22, started building these devices by hand, selling them out of his parents' basement online. Fast forward 8 years, and we got $1 billion valuation from the Wall Street Journal. So actually the only unicorn company in the state of Connecticut. So one of those basement to billions type stories. Now we're up over 1,800 employees worldwide. We've got 23 offices, and we protect over 560 petabytes of data in our 9 data centers worldwide. We have 2 here in the States, one in Allentown, Pennsylvania, one in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'll get into the importance of those. But the point is the data always stays in the country it originates, and it is a private cloud. So one of the largest private clouds anywhere in the world. So let's set the stage with kind of talking about where we are right now and the threats that we're seeing and really the evolution of these threats. Obviously, the last 3 months have been really crazy in the economy and in the business community. Everybody's kind of shifting off site in some various capacities. And we've seen these criminals really take advantage of that. World Health Organization reported they have a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks. That's going across the board in really all industries as criminals saying, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit here. And we can go through it. I won't even mention every single one of these stats because you could read them on the screen, but they really are scary stats. And I've been giving these presentations now. I'm into my 5th year, and the stats have really just continued to increase. Despite all of the education that's going out in the world and all of the different technologies, you know, it's a race to the top, and so we're always fighting and battling with these criminals. I would tell you that we're going to go through some technology and some things like that. The most important thing that you can do is attend a webinar like this and do training and really create a culture of security and have plans in place and procedures in place to combat this. Because most of the time what they're hoping for is somebody asleep at the wheel opening the door to that network so they can go in there and either extract data or commit a ransomware attack and really impact, you know, the viability of that business. So when you look at who we're up against, one of the things that kind of gives businesses, especially in the small business community, a little sense of false security is that we're still under the impression that this is the guy in his basement, right? This is some 17-year-old kid who doesn't want to get a summer job, so he's going to go hack into some computers and make a little money, or the guy that just wants to go on the chat boards and brag about, hey, did you see that attack? That was me. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We're up against some very, very advanced groups out there. Organized crime has shifted that way. There are folks, it's actually a corporate structure that we're up against. There are folks, they call it ransomware as a service. So there's a group of folks that create these ransomware viruses. They then allow you to be a franchisee and go and deploy those ransomware viruses and for a fee. And there are places around the world where there are buildings and people punch a card, they go in, they do work just like anything else. They leave at 5 o'clock, they go have dinner with their families. It is literally set up as a business structure. And the ransomware virus in particular is extremely scary, and it is targeting the small business community, despite the fact that you see the stories about the Fortune 500 companies and the hospitals and all the rest. We still do see insider threats. A lot of this is intellectual property. This is more at the higher level, but we still see it everywhere where there's money to be made. People will break the laws to go get that. I mentioned organized crime. We're not necessarily seeing bank robberies occur with the guys with the ski masks breaking in with machine guns. Crime is done in the cyber world now, and that includes the organized crime that we're thinking about here in the States and Europe and Russia and China. There's so much money to be made with so little risk of getting caught that they are now attacking businesses, nation states. When you go and you sit and you talk to folks from the FBI or other governmental agencies, they will tell you that paying a ransom is actually oftentimes breaking the law, because the folks that are behind this are oftentimes either terrorist organizations, foreign nation states that are combative to the United States. And, they'll tell you, we put all these sanctions in place to try to combat these guys and shut them down, but they're going to find ways to make money. And this is one of those ways. So if you're actually paying the ransom, there's a chance that you're now funding a terrorist organization. And then we hear the Internet of Things. Everything's connected. There's some, I talk about how robberies are done nowadays. There was an attack a couple years back, the largest casino heist ever perpetrated. And the way these guys were able to get into the system was through the internet-connected fish tank thermometer. They were able to infiltrate this network and now extract all of the financial data and personal data for all the high rollers. So yes, it's great. Everything's connected. I use my Alexa and everything else, but those need to be protected as well. So how are they getting in? Sometimes it's still in those unsophisticated ways. It's those phishing emails. Now the phishing emails have changed from where it used to be the long lost uncle. They're going to give you, $1 million in their will if you give them $5,000, those type of things. Now they've shifted to what you probably heard the phrase socially engineered spear phishing attacks, where they want that email to look like every other email in your inbox. Specifically where we're living right now, within days, there was emails going out saying, hey, somebody in your family has contracted the COVID-19 virus. Click here to figure out what the next steps are, where you can go get tested. That was malware. If anybody watches that Johns Hopkins sites that tracks all the states and all the countries and all the infections worldwide, within days, there was a dummy website that mirrored it completely, was being shared on social media via emails. That was a form of malware. So they're very quick to get in. Sometimes it's the brute force and they're able to get in that way. They're still doing, password hacking. This is easy things you could do. You could protect yourself with multi-factor authentication, things like that. It is amazing. And I'm sure Ken sees the same stats. The last 5 years, they look at most common password. It's still some form of password 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe I'll put the ampersand in there, or maybe I'll put an exclamation point or something like that. There are systems in place where they could hack that in seconds. So there's some security there, but easily just multi-factor authentication helps as well. And then when you go down into the dark web, it's a really scary place to be. And one of the threats, I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the futurists on the podcast mentioned that what they think is going to happen is all these students are now working remote and they're on their home network, and a lot of young kids think it's cool to go down to the dark web. There's even a threat that these folks are staying dormant, and then they're going to now pop up when these kids turn 18. But think about if you're working from home and you're on the same network as your kids, and maybe they're using a device that has access to some of your business data. These are things you definitely cannot do. And so we're going to talk about the cost of downtime, because the cost is real. And people talk about, all right, I'm getting hit with ransomware. Maybe they're going to ask me $10,000. Maybe I'll pay it. I don't really need to be protected. Worst case scenario, I pay it. The ripple effects of these attacks are far greater than the actual ransom payments. Forbes put out a report earlier this year that was picked up by the New York Times as well that said that the average ransomware attack for a small business is $84,000. And that's because that includes the cost of data loss, includes the cost of downtime, includes the cost of folks never reopening their doors. I mean, there's stories, you can Google stories all over the country in all industries that'll show you folks that can never recover their data and never get back up online. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study back in 2017 that said that 71% of small businesses that are down for a week or more close their doors within 12 months. FEMA last year around hurricane season said that a business that goes down due to a natural disaster has a 60% chance of never reopening their doors. And so it's really important to put systems in place to make sure that if an attack occurs, you can continuously run your business as you move forward. Now, we do our own ransomware studies to try to make sure that our numbers align, and we do them independently. And we run ours from July 1st through June 30th. So we're putting together our new one now. Last year, we saw the actual payments averaging around $4,300, not enough to break the bank. The average cost of downtime, 10 times higher. And what was interesting was in that Forbes article, they said that it had doubled. And last year, their number was 41,000. So our numbers are really pretty much in line. And we see that through different studies across the board. That cost of downtime is really the piece of leverage that these guys have. And, you know, we could sit in here and talk a lot about acronyms and technology, and we could bore you to death. But there's two that you really need to be able to answer. And this is a place where, you know, Ken can come in and help you answer these questions, because I have conversations with thousands of businesses around the world, and I get a sense of where they are in terms of their backup and their security. And when you talk about ransomware specifically, there's two acronyms that they are very well aware of and two acronyms that you need to be prepared to answer. The first one is pretty easy, left-hand side of the screen. That's your recovery point objective. How much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? That's relatively simple to answer. How often are you taking your backups? You're taking them daily, then you're saying, okay, I could absorb losing a day's worth of data. And depending on your business, that could be fine. Some folks need more aggressive RPO of 1 hour, or even maybe more aggressive than that. But for the most part, companies feel pretty good about that piece. People have been backing up their data for a long time. I talk to very few businesses who aren't backing up their data. The caveat, obviously, is if you're not testing those backups, you cannot answer that question. That star on the left-hand side of the screen might look nice if you're saying I'm backing it up hourly. We've been doing it for years. Then you get hit with a ransomware attack and you find out nobody's been testing those backups and they've been failing for 3 weeks. Well, now that star just jumped from 1 hour to 3 weeks. But for the most part, that's their first piece of leverage. They're encrypting your data. They're not even stealing it. They're encrypting it for the most part. And they're saying, okay, pay me a ransom. I'm going to give you the encryption key. You could be on their way. If you're not backing up your data, of course, you're going to have to pay or you're going to shut your doors. Most people are. So they feel like, hey, I could take care of that. The reason why people pay is that right-hand side of the screen. Recovery time objective. Now, this is the more difficult one to answer, and that is how much downtime would you incur? And more importantly, how much downtime can you incur before you really starts impacting your bottom line? And what that means is, yes, you're backing up your data. Fine. How long would it take you to get all that data back into a production environment and get your business back up and running? Would that be 2 days, 2 weeks? I talk to very few people who have a firm answer on what that would look like. And then you have to try to put a dollar value on that. If I'm down for a week, how much is it going to cost me? Because that's the real piece of leverage. The criminals know, all right, chances are this company I'm attacking is backing up their data. And I'm going to put them in a position to say, pay me $5,000 right now, and I'm going to unencrypt your data. Or you're going to absorb that downtime and come call me in a week and tell me how much more money that you lost. Again, that's that 10-time factor, and it's actually increasing. Around the world, sometimes it's even higher. So that's the real piece of leverage. That's the reason why so many people pay. And the reason why the small business community is more susceptible is because typically they don't have things like business continuity in place, and the criminals know that. And also, they can't absorb the downtime. I mean, there's numbers from the city of Atlanta who was hit a couple years ago, and I like that story because it's got real numbers. They were asked for $52,000. They didn't pay it. Again, the government policy is not to pay it. They were down for several weeks. They had systems like their criminal database that was down for several weeks. They wound up having to go back to the city and ask for $12.2 million in additional funds to remediate this issue. $52,000 for the ask, $12 million for the actual impact of that. That number might seem crazy and it's hard to scale. The entire IT budget for the city of Atlanta was $36 million. A third of it went towards that one single attack. Now, the city of Atlanta is not going to close their doors, right? They're going to bond off some more money. Small businesses can't absorb that. The criminals know that. That's why they're more apt to pay. And I always use the analogy, if you're a criminal enterprise, you could be the home run hitter and go after folks like, large banks, hospitals, municipalities, police departments, and that's fine. Or you could be the singles hitter and say, I could attack thousands of small businesses every week, knowing that a certain amount are going to click on it, a certain amount are not going to have solutions in place, and they're going to pay. And those are the folks that are really making a lot of money, because no industry is safe. The kind of genius behind ransomware is, yes, back in the day, only companies that were being attacked were the companies that had really valuable data, financial information, things that could be sold on the dark web. And so the small business community said, why would anybody spend time attacking me? Who am I? I don't have any data like that. Well, now with ransomware, they don't care what your data is. They don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a one-man nonprofit. You have to pay that ransom in order to get the data back, because you can't operate without your data. And so they know that the small business community is more apt to pay. So luckily, everything has evolved, right? The way the criminals are getting in has evolved. So has the technology. All of the intrusion protections are great, and they're evolving, and they're doing a really good job of keeping a lot of these bad actors out. But ultimately, the way you're backing up your data is truly your last line of defense. And so a lot of folks are still in that traditional form of backup. Everything else has evolved. Your cell phone's evolved, the way that you're operating. Maybe you're using applications out of the cloud. All your business software has evolved. But people still tend to be using the antiquated kind of commoditized file and folder backup, which is backing up the files and folders. But backup has evolved so much that if you're still using that, you really are behind the times, and the criminals are relying on the fact that small businesses are still using that. And here's why. What does business continuity look like? Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure it's a hybrid approach. So you want to have on-premise data, but you also want it replicating to multiple different geographical locations. I mean, simply put, I talk to a lot of businesses that say, I have got my backup and it's on site. And then I walk into their office and their rack is unlocked and wide open. Or maybe their IT person, this still happens, takes their data home on the weekends and locks it up, and that's their secure way of doing things. Clearly, there's a lot of risk in all of that. But maybe you do have an offsite and that's it. The reason why having a hybrid solution is important is great, because you've got the on-premise. This is going to be super quick for restorations and some of the virtualization capabilities. But if a true disaster strikes and something impacts your office, well, now you've got a second copy of your data over in Allentown. If a true disaster strikes and everything is falling down and whatever's impacting you is impacting Allentown, Pennsylvania, well, you've got a third copy of your data on the other side of the country. I mentioned those locations. The real simple reason why we selected those is because they're on the opposite side of the country. Same with our two up in Canada. We want to make sure that if there is some sort of natural disaster and the world is falling down, you want to have a safe copy of your data. Gartner had a good study a couple of years ago, and there's a quote that I always quote is, whatever you're buying and selling in the IT space, assume that it fails. What next? You got all these protections in place. Okay, assume that fails. What happens? Well, I've got a backup on premise. Okay, what if that backup is impacted? What next? Got another copy of my data in Allentown. Okay, doomsday scenario. What about the next step? I've got one on the other side. So that's critical. Multiple copies of your data in different geographical locations, all with the same capabilities for restoration. You also want to make it automated. 91% of all data loss and downtime occurs from user error. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, this is not some malicious attack. This is somebody not being trained, going to the wrong websites from their work network, clicking on attachments they're not supposed to, hyperlinks within emails, things like that. Also, on the backup side of things, is somebody manually taking those backups? I could tell you the last business that I was at in the construction industry, that was the case. When we did large commercial projects, we did hospitals, we did schools, and we were responsible for backing up our own data. It was crazy. So you want to take the user error out of it. What you're going to do is you'd sit down with Ken and say, okay, what is my RPO goal? How much data can I absorb losing? Hourly? Okay, let's set up our hourly schedule. I'm going to back up hourly during business hours. Okay, here we are. Those backups are all going to occur on their own. But not only are they going to occur, there's going to be testing of every single one of those backups, not just on premise, but also the offsite sync. And hopefully when Ken and his team sit down every morning and look at their fleet of devices, they see all these pretty green dots. It means everything's running perfectly. Maybe they see an X. Maybe there was some sort of backup failure. Well, now you could be proactive and take a look at, hey, did this really fail, or was this a false alert? Those type of things. And you're not finding out, again, weeks later, that maybe your backups have been failing. So this is critical. This is taking that user error out of it. Now, the way the backups are taken are vastly different as well. Traditional backup, they're doing what you're telling it to do. Here's the files and folders. I want you to back up, and there you go. But at the end of the day, all you've got is files and folders. With business continuity, it's actually a complete snapshot of that entire server. So not only the files and folders are being captured, but also all the business software, all the applications, all of the operating system that you have on there. Everything is now mirrored over to that on-premise device and then subsequently sent off to the data centers. Now, what this allows us to do, as on the face of it, obviously you're not missing any volumes, but beyond that, the way that you're able to now continuously take up backups is vastly different, because once that base image is taken and now we've got everything copied on that server, now you set up that schedule that we saw on the last screen, and all we're doing is taking block level incremental changes. So we're just taking backups of what changes are occurring. What that allows us to do is set up what's called an inverse chain. It's actually proprietary to Datto, the way that this backup is occurring, because what it means is now every one of those backup points is independent of one another. They're not layered upon previous backups like traditional backups. So if you get hit at 11 o'clock, you could take that little time machine back to 10 o'clock and know that that backup is safe and secure and all that data is there. And you could just wipe that encrypted data out, figure out what's going on that system, and get back up and running. So this is extremely critical, making sure that your last backup is safe. So when we talk about your RPO, you could answer that RPO question with confidence. But ultimately, the way that you combat this, I mentioned some of the scary stats about downtime. The virtualization capability is really what you're looking for here. And what that means, it's very simple. Somebody in your office gets a scary red screen. Okay, I've been hit with ransomware. It's now infected my server. What happens? Well, because everything that lived on that server lived on that on-premise device, it would be a phone call into Ken and his team. They would spin up what's called a virtual machine, meaning this device would now be operating as your server, and it's a true production environment. Everybody that had access to that server is going to be operating off of this. You're going to be able to take active backups in this state. So instead of thinking to myself on the RTO side, okay, how long is it going to take me to restore my data? That's not your first worry. Your first worry is, let's get back up and running, right? So the first thing is going to be, let's get everybody back up and running. If it's happening on premise, for the most part, people in the office aren't even going to know that failover had occurred. And you could be in this state now for several hours, several days, several weeks, as maybe you're doing some forensics on what happened to that device. And now when that new piece of hardware is in place, now you could bring all of that data back over and get you back to where you were, not when the scary red screen popped up, but instead where you were right when that restoration needed to occur. And you could start that restoration and copying that image while you're still in that virtualized state. So when you talk about downtime, clearly we're reducing it up front, but also on the back end as well. That's the piece of leverage that they have. And with this, you're going to be able to answer those two questions, right? We already know the RPO because we've talked about you setting up your schedule and testing those backups. These virtualization capabilities are tested every single night as well. Every single night, it's brought up, the boot screen is brought up, spun up in the background, snapshot is taken with the timestamp saying, yes, this is now a bootable backup that we can virtualize. That screenshot is sent off. So when you come into work on a Monday morning, regardless of what happens, you know that you can do this and reduce that downtime now from, instead of days or weeks, to minutes or hours. And because it's being tested, you could do an offsite sync, you could do offsite testing and schedule that as well. Because you have all these capabilities both locally or from either one of those data centers. To be honest, the real test for Datto was Hurricane Sandy. We're right on Long Island Sound. I could tell you, I'm born and raised here. I was out of power for 8 days. Businesses were all, kind of in disarray. There were thousands of businesses, all shapes and sizes, all different industries, operating out of our data centers as their server rooms were being drained out, new racks were being put in. How many of those businesses would have been part of those statistics saying they never were able to reopen their doors? This allows you to combat that. And now we do see, especially now, when we've had, obviously some issues with Microsoft Teams a little bit earlier, but, everybody's moving to the cloud and SaaS applications. That's great. You start to see the massive amount of new accounts on Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all the rest. The SaaS applications are vulnerable as well. There are ransomware viruses attacking O365. If you want to Google a pretty interesting story, there's a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick. At one point, he was on the FBI's most wanted list, the most notorious hacker in the world back in the 90s. He got captured, went to jail. It's kind of one of those catch me if you can type stories. He comes out, he becomes a good guy, works with the government. He created a virus just to show how easy it was, and he called it Ransom Cloud. And this specifically attacked O365. And what it was, email comes out. I saw the demo live, and I can get you a recording of it. He's got 2 laptops open. This looks like any other email you would have gotten from Microsoft. Everybody would fall for this, right? Just Anti-Spam Pro. That's all you got to do. Here you go. Click the accept button, and we're on our way. And then boom, every single email in that domain is now encrypted. And the only email you could open is the pretty red screen from Kevin saying, hey, for a few Bitcoin, I'll get you back on your way. Wherever that data lives, these criminals are going to find a way to attack it. And I mentioned how opportunistic they are. As people start moving to the cloud, they will move towards the cloud. So just to recap, couple simple ways you could stay protected. Things like this, knowing that you are a target, both online and offline. They are looking to gather information about you. Think of all the information you share on social media. That's all ammunition for these folks to start creating those spear phishing attacks, knowing what you like, who you're friends with, who you're connected with at LinkedIn, what college you went to. So they'll maybe send out an email saying, hey, you went to Penn State? Here's your alumni association email, right? Your 20-year reunion's coming up. Click here. They'll know if you're a sales rep and say at the end of the quarter, I'm going to have to look like I'm coming from a vendor saying, hey, please process this invoice quickly. If you're a sales rep with a quota sitting over your head, how quickly you're going to click on that email. That all comes back to policy and procedures. I mentioned, all these great technology in place. The most important thing you do is have policies and procedures in place. And hopefully during this whole shift from work from home and eventually hopefully return to normalcy, people have been taking notes and some lessons learned so that at the next phase of this, whatever it is, we're more prepared. That comes down to documentation of all of those things. That goes right into the employee training. We have this recording. You're going to be able to share that with anybody within your organization. Password management. Have a conversation with Ken about this. This is simple stuff, how you could manage those passwords. It's not, these doomsday. Yes, they can crack passwords very quickly, but you have ways to combat that. Very simple things, and we're thinking about it now. Don't leave your devices. If it's got business data on it or access to business data, do not ever leave them unattended. Especially everybody's working from home. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. God knows what kind of things. They know how to get to YouTube. They know how to get to websites. I can never leave this device open. It's very scary stuff. And so you worry about what your kids are going to click on. What about what you click on, right? Nowadays, you're seeing all these stories, all these fake stories and sensational stories. And you see things on Facebook, hey, Brad Pitt has died from TMZ. And he's like, oh, I'm going to click on this. And then again, it's malware. They're very, very conscientious. When you're going through an email, very simple thing. Just if it looks suspicious at all, just hover over the email address. It might say it's coming from Michael DePalma. I could put in the name whatever I want, but when you look at the actual email address, you'll see it's John Snow at blah 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 blah, and you say this does not look like a real email address. That might be coming from Netflix. Hey, update your account. Scroll over that, or if there's a hyperlink in there, scroll over the hyperlink. And if it seems like this is not sending me to Netflix.com, obviously don't click on it. You want those protections in up front. That's kind of a no-brainer, but make sure that they are adjusted. That's why working with somebody like a Ken who's now vetted all of these vendors. I mean, the amount of time you go and spend vetting different vendors and putting together a cohesive stack of products, that's very critical. I always say if it's free, there's a reason why it's free. So make sure that you're having those conversations. Backups, I think we've covered that, the real need for that. And that's backing up data wherever it lives. If it's any sort of business data, it needs to be backed up. If it's on your personal device, back up that personal device. There are image-based solutions for a personal device as well. And then simple things, just mobile device policy. How many people are working off of that? How are simple things about password protection and your PINs and things like that? Do you have multi-factor authentication that'll send things to your cell phone to allow you in? And then, the pen testing, the security testing, all of those things need to be an ongoing process. But you are headed in the right direction. If you're joining and you're listening into a webinar like this, at least it's showing that you are concerned about the threats that are out there. You do want to learn more. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of if you ever want to get down into the weeds, that's a conversation you should have with Ken. But obviously, any questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ken to see if you have any parting thoughts. But here's the contact information. So, Ken.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much. A lot of people ask me, Ken, why did you guys select Datto? You kind of mentioned the importance of vetting out vendors. North Star Technology Group has been around for 20 years. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary here in January, and we've worked with a lot of different vendors in the business continuity, the backup space. We've worked with them all, and I can tell you without a doubt that Datto has the most complete, easy to use, rock solid solution that we've ever seen. And some of the reasons, just to kind of quickly go into it, it used to take us hours to do an even local on-premise restore of servers. We can now do it in under a minute. And love to give demos of that. Our retention off-site into the cloud, we use a cloud provider partner, was 2 weeks max, and if you start to add more, or even a second data center in a different geography, it got to be really, really expensive. So being able to have data cloud retention that could be infinite, a year's worth, or even just to the capacity of that device, it was huge for us. And and finally, Datto allows us to be able to do cloud-based disaster recovery fire drills, so we can actually test and spin up entire workloads in their data center in the cloud. And we can do that to actually ensure that if you guys have a full disaster at your location, that we're able to get the entire systems up and running. And I can't say enough about how amazing the snapshot verification is. Being able to look on our portal and see a snapshot of that login screen is huge for us. I would go weeks not really, to be honest, not sure are these backups actually happen. With one glance, I can know and know for sure. So I think it's amazing. I want to offer everybody a promotion. Contact me at that email address that you see there. And reach out. We are offering kind of a short-term promotion where partners that come on with us and they sign a 36-month term will get a free appliance, and that's a really, really good deal. It could be valued up thousands of dollars depending on the size of your organization and how much data we're backing up. So love to work with you, love to talk to you guys more about a layered security approach. But again, Mike, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ken.